I'll see you soon.
Tonight's upload is brought to you by our patrons from the Patreon page. That's Cecilia Spears, Hawaii, Carl Leakins, Catherine McClear, Sean Campbell, Aaron Alexa, Allison Seib, and Ryan Woodward. Thank you guys so much for supporting the channel through Patreon. And if anybody listening right now enjoys the content of the 80 Slasher Librarian YouTube channel and would like to help keep it going and growing for a long time to come, then click the link in the description below and sign up on Patreon for as low as $2 to $5 per month. You get some great rewards depending on the tier you select and early access exclusive content before it reaches YouTube. Appreciate you all. Enjoy tonight's upload of Final Destination. Final Destination, Dead Reckoning, Chapter 2. An age ticked by. Jess slowly became aware that she wasn't dead. She could feel her heart beating, hammering in her chest as though trying to burst through her ribcage and escape. Blood pounded in her ears, and the echoes of her scream still hung in the air. There was a faint buzzing sound on the periphery of her hearing, like a small bee trapped in a long metal tube. Other than that, the world was silent. Jess slowly let out her breath, then, with some consideration, removed her hands from her head. Nothing had happened to her. Taking this as a good sign, Jess opened her eyes. 100 puzzled faces stared up at her. Multicolored stage lights played over the crowd, illuminating the packed club in staccato bursts. It was deathly quiet. Jess could hear the faint clicks of the stage lights as they moved in their mounts. A sea of people filled the dance floor in front of her, clutching their cans and bottles and glasses of soda. Some of them were wearing multicolored wigs. Down in the wings, the members of the next band were waiting to go on. At the back of the room, a young couple were making out on the sofa. Needless to those around them, everything looked perfectly normal. Jess stood and stared, her heart pounding, fighting down an overwhelming sense of déjà vu. A hand landed on her shoulder, and she let out a small yip and spun around. Cassie was standing behind her, looking at her in concern. Her bass hung forgotten from her neck, connected to an amp which was buzzing loudly in the silence. Behind her, Jamie sat behind his drums, staring at her and scratching his head with the drumstick. "What's up?" Jess yelped to see Tony standing in front of her, alive and well. She put her hand over her mouth and stared up at him. He was alive. She began. Then she looked off to her left, distracted. Jamie was waving a drumstick at her and mouthing, "You freak." Jess cleared her throat, trying to ignore him. I had a... She stopped. Had a what? She asked herself. Her heart was pounding as if she'd just run a marathon. What the hell had just happened to her? What was that? A thought occurred to her, and she shakily picked up the bottle of water she had been drinking from on stage and sniffed at it suspiciously. Was this a hallucination? Had somebody slipped something into her drink? But even as the thought entered her head, she knew that this was not the case. Terror raced through her, making her pulse pound afresh as the memories swamped her. The whole experience had been so real. She had been standing right here, and the ceiling had collapsed, and it had killed her. She could still hear the screams of the dying ringing in her ears. It hadn't just been a dream. Jess knew it with an unshakable certainty. She could still taste the blood in her mouth, feel the pain of her own broken bones piercing her skin as the rubble crushed her to oblivion. A wave of goosebumps crashed over her, and Jess shivered despite the heat of the club. Jess." Jamie pointed over her shoulder. Turning slowly around, Jess saw that she was being stared at by over 100 curious people. Jess attempted a desperate smile, aware that some kind of explanation was called for. She adjusted the strap of her Gibson and tried to act casual. "There was, a wasp." The crowd tittered, although some of them looked less than amused. A buzz of conversation rose, punctuated by one or two shouts of, "Off!" Jess stepped back, her mind racing as she tried to adjust to this new reality. She felt as if she had just awakened from one bad dream straight into another. But if this was real, had she really just screamed like that on stage? Oh, the club manager was really going to kill her this time. Outside the back of the club, Officer Marina Hulet ducked into a shadow and waited. All was quiet in the streets around the place. It was approaching 12:30 and the bars were just starting to turn out onto the street. She straightened her cap wearily, trying not to yawn. It was late and she was tired. This place was a hellhole, and the streets were filled with little devils. She knew that she'd almost certainly be needed out here tonight to sort out some barroom brawl or scuffle. But for now she had a job to do. Leaning in towards the door, she pressed her ear against the boarded-up top window. From within she could hear a muffled rhythmic thumping, like some giant industrial machine. That's what these places were, really, she thought, gloomily as she reached into her bag for her gun. Just giant machines for taking kids' money, getting them drunk, high, and occasionally pregnant. All kinds of terrible things went on in these places. Marina knew that they did, because she was the one they called out whenever things got out of hand, which was often. She'd only been working this neighborhood for a month since her transfer from Chicago, and boy, was she missing home. She sniffed loudly, glancing over her shoulder to check that no one was watching her. It was late, and she was yearning to go home to bed. The back lot of the club was completely deserted, which was good. She glanced down at the ground where the remains of a snapped metal bar taunted her, reminding her of her futile efforts to break into the club unseen. She rubbed the palm of her hand irritably, frowning at the door. There was one other option, but no, it would never work. If she went in the front way through the main entrance, her cover would be blown in about 2 seconds. It would all be over before it had even begun. She needed to get into this place unseen if she were going to do her job properly. She smiled grimly to herself. Hell, if she pulled this one off, she might even get that bonus her superintendent had been going on about for the past 3 weeks. She hoped that the guy who'd given her the tip-off knew what he was talking about. She stared at the door, trying to gauge the strength and weight of the huge industrial lock cemented into place beneath the boarded-up window. What she was about to do was pretty risky, and she would no doubt get in trouble if anyone reported her. But in a place like this, who was going to do that? It should be a simple job. She should be in and out in minutes, hopefully hauling out with her the miscreants who were allegedly using the club's back room as a makeshift coke den. Officer Hulet cracked her knuckles pensively. Her entire day had already been wrecked by that jackass with the tow truck this morning. So what was the harm in cutting a few corners? The sooner that she got home and got to bed, the better. A whole morning of mopping up blood and wrestling with paperwork just because some woman had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. It had not put her in a very good mood. Fate could be a bitch like that. A graphic image entered her mind, and she shook her head to dislodge it. She'd been pissed to lose her lunch break, but still, poor lady, what a way to go. There had been so much blood, she couldn't even finish her hot dog afterwards. That in itself was a crime. But it was just another typical day in the life of an LAPD cop. Things could be a lot worse. Banishing the thought from her mind, Officer Hulet clicked the safety catch off her service-issue pistol and screwed a stubby silencer onto the barrel. She had work to do. She took one last peek through the gap in the boarding to ensure that nobody was in the room. The floor inside looked like it was made of pretty sturdy concrete. It should contain her shot nicely. She aimed the gun at the lock at an angle of 45 degrees. Careful now. Easy does it. She moved her feet further apart so that her weight was distributed evenly on each foot and took a careful breath. She held it, steadying her ribcage as she'd been taught. Then she squeezed off a single, silent shot. Back on stage, Tony nodded curtly at Jess. "A wasp, sure," he said, trying to keep the irritation out of his voice. "You don't want to get stung by one of them. That could really ruin your day." Giving Jess a strange look, he turned away from her and strummed a chord on his guitar. Then he nodded to the others and launched into the intro of the next song as though nothing had happened. Cassie joined him on the bass after a moment. Then Jamie got the message and added his drums to the mix, breaking down after a minute into an energetic solo. Together the band played on. Jess swallowed, trying to control the racing of her pulse. She was completely freaked out. It must have been a dream, but this feeling that she had, it was for real. It had to be. She knew in her gut that something was very wrong. Jess reached towards the microphone, then stopped, her eyes scanning the mass of clubgoers. Charlie Delgado was in the crowd. He saw her look over and waved to her. Unable to help herself, Jess glanced sharply up at the ceiling. But as she did so, the spotlights clicked on, blinding her. She squinted against the light, her vision filled with black halos in the glare. She couldn't see a thing. Jamie finished his solo, and Jess realized that this was the bit where she was supposed to sing. Her mouth opened, then closed, but nothing came out. People were staring at her again. Her throat felt as dry as the desert. The crowd was starting to get restless, and as the silence lengthened, she could hear mutters drifting up from the heaving throng. "Last show was much better. What's with that singer? Bunch of amateurs." Jess swallowed, trying to get some moisture to her parched throat. Her heart was pounding again. She knew that it was ridiculous, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. She squinted up at the ceiling again, but the lights were still shining into her eyes, completely blinding her. Making a snap decision, Jess stepped away from the microphone and strode briskly to the side of the stage, ignoring the puzzled stares from the other band members. It was no good. She couldn't go on like this. She had to know. Outside the beam of the spotlight, she took a deep breath, then looked up. There was a crack in the center of the ceiling, badly covered with lumpy red paint. In the room above her, Officer Hulet's bullet drilled through the lock in a shower of sparks, then smacked into the wooden floor on the other side. In milliseconds, it traveled across the wire-packed space underneath the floorboards and embedded itself in the ancient concrete support pillar just below it. The entire structure vibrated with the impact, dust jumping off the wall in the packed cluster room below. And then everything was still again. Outside the club, Officer Hulet jumped back as the lock flew apart in a tangle of warped metal. A wisp of smoke drifted up from the lock. The officer held her breath for a moment, her eyes ticking left and right. The neighborhood was silent. Nobody in their right mind noticed another gunshot in a place like this, and the silencer had taken most of the sound out of the shot anyway. Congratulating herself on a job well done, Officer Hulet holstered her gun, then pushed the heavy door open with her foot, and made her way into the club. She didn't even notice the small hole in the floor, where her bullet had passed through. It was time to make those arrests. In the space underneath the floor, a bundle of severed wires began to spark. On the floor underneath, Jess began backing away from the front of the stage, staring upwards. A wave of dread rolled over her as she contemplated what she had just seen. This couldn't be a coincidence, could it? Maybe her subconscious had seen the state of the ceiling and incorporated it into her hallucination, or whatever that was, but this was just plain scary. She looked up again. She had to be sure. There was one other thing. On cue, one of the stage lights started flickering out of time with the rest. Jess gave a small squeak. Seeing that Jess wasn't going to sing, the band kicked into action to cover for her. Tony bounced to the front of the stage and went into a flamboyant rock break, trying to hide the fact that his lead singer had just gone AWOL. He bounced around the stage in front of her, trying to keep the audience's eyes off of Jess for as long as possible. As he played, he knocked Jamie's bottle of Jack Daniels off the stage, which shattered and shorted out one of the stage's spotlights. Behind him, he heard Jess gasp. That did it. Snapping out of her trance, Jess ran across the center stage and seized the mic, making frantic cut motions to Jamie. "Sorry, folks, that's all we have time for tonight," she announced. "We are the Vipers. We hope you liked our show. Thank you, and good night." The band ground a halt for the second time that evening. The crowd stared at Jess, unbelieving. "This club is now closed. Please make your way to the nearest exit," Jess said, in what she hoped was a firm voice. "Quickly now," she added. Her hands began to tremble. Nobody moved. A loud muttering rose from the throng. Trying to move them along, Jess held out her arms like an air hostess. "The exits are to the back and to the left," she said desperately. Tony grabbed Jess's arm and spun her around. "What the hell?" he hissed. Jess started to reply, but Tony cut her off. "It was a wasp, not a bomb. What are you, allergic?" He stared at her, his blue eyes blazing with fury. "Do you even care how long it took me to set this gig up? We're lucky to even have a show after last time." "Tony, listen to me. This club is unsafe," Jess said. Tony started to reply, then saw that the people in the front row were watching him a little too closely. With a glare of the gawping crowd, he took Jess by the hand and hauled her to the back of the stage, behind Jamie. "So, what, you've only just noticed?" He ran a hand through his spiked hair, then took Jess by the shoulders and gently shook her. "Jessie, you can't keep doing this. I don't care what's not right. You want to play anywhere better? You goddamn better take what we can afford to." "But the roof's gonna fall in!" Jess hissed. "What?" "You heard me." The words all came out in a rush. "I had a vision of it happening, and I don't know why or how, but I was there, not like in a dream, but like it was real life that was really happening to me." She clutched desperately at Tony's hand. "Tony, the whole fucking roof fell in, and it killed everyone. It was horrible. I was there. I saw it happen." Jess glanced feverishly out at the crowd, who were craning their necks to get a better view of her. A loud muttering filled the room. She felt tears start to threaten, but carried on regardless. "Tony, you have to believe me. Everything I saw is coming true already. Everything is just like it was at the start of my vision, like when you broke that bottle. That happened too. And now we're all gonna die, and it'll be your fault for holding everyone up." Tony stared at her, his expression darkening. "Did your vision include the bit where I smack you one and tell you to get the fuck over it?" He reached up and swept the bandana off his head. "For God's sake, woman, we have a show to do. The rent doesn't just pay itself, you know." Jess stared at Tony, worlds colliding in her mind. She realized in an instant that he would never believe her, and that even now she was wasting precious time. Before Tony could stop her, Jess pulled away from him and ran back across the stage to the mic. She had to get everyone out of the club right now, or she knew that her horrific vision would somehow become reality. She waved her hands urgently at the crowd, who responded with jeers and catcalls. "Come on, people, the show's over. We'll be closing in 5. An open bottle of water was thrown at her, bouncing off the end of her guitar. "Minutes!" The speakers shrieked with feedback as the water splashed across her guitar pickups. The crowd started stamping its feet and chanting, "Off! Off! Off!" As Jess stood there helplessly, a hand reached over her shoulder and plucked the mic from her. She looked back to see the club manager standing behind her, an imposing man in a charcoal gray suit and neon pink socks. He glared at Jess, his mustache quivering in anger. "Hey!" Jess tried to grab the mic back, but the man held it up out of her reach, as though she were a child. Turning away from her, he tapped the mic a couple of times, and then turned to face the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began. To Jess, it seemed like he took forever to get the sentence out. "We are having a few," he glared at Jess, "technical difficulties. Please bear with us for a couple of minutes." "Thank you." He switched the mic off firmly and made a gesture to one of the stagehands to close the curtain. The boom of a pre-recorded dance tune filled the air as filler music was switched on. Angry shouts came from the crowd, and loud booing filled the air. They wanted a spectacle, not a blank curtain. Somebody threw a beer can at the stage, which clattered across the wooden flooring and hit Jess on the leg. Over by the bar, an off-duty female cop sipped at her drink slowly and watched Jess intently. As the curtains closed, the manager folded his arms and scowled at Jess. "What's wrong with you?" he demanded. "I had a vision. It was real, and I know it's going to come true. The club fell down and everyone died. We have to get these people out of here. She stopped as she saw the expression on the club manager's face. "Please leave." "But Now!" "You don't get it, do you? This place is going to collapse. I saw it!" Jess was frantic. She knew that she sounded crazy, but she didn't care. "I know that it's true because of the crack in the ceiling, and the light broke when I knew it would. Then Tony knocked the bottle off the stage at that exact same time as I saw him do it." "Okay, that's enough." Tony took hold of Jess's hand and tried to pull her away from the manager, but Jess stood firm. She seized Tony's arm and gazed at him imploringly. "They're all gonna die. First you die, then she dies, then they all die. You've got to get them all out of here." "What's going on?" Jamie stepped up beside her and put a hand on her shoulder. Jess seized his arm like a lifeline. "I had a vision, like a kind of premonition. It was horrible, Jamie. The ceiling fell in and everybody died. It really happened. And now it's going to happen for real. And we have to get out of here before it does. Everyone dies, even me. You have to believe me." Jess fell silent, suddenly aware that she was raving. She realized how she must look. Slowly she turned and looked around at a wall of stony expressions. With a horrible sinking feeling, she knew that she had lost them. She wouldn't believe anyone who sounded as crazy as she just did. "This her?" Jess looked over her shoulder to see the club bouncer step up behind her. He did not look happy. He folded his muscular arms, making that small gesture seem like the equivalent to jacking around into a shotgun. Jess noticed that he had fate tattooed on one arm and love on the other. She swallowed. "Mr. Sebastian, kindly show this young lady to the exit," the manager said. "Wait a minute. Just let me talk to the—" "Now would be a good time, Mr. Sebastian." Jess found herself seized in a grip that could crush metal. She pulled at it ineffectually, then twisted around and dealt the bouncer a swift kick to the shins. All this succeeded in doing was making him grip her arm tighter. She winced and started slapping at his hands. "Time to go, miss." The bouncer's voice would have ground down mountains. "You've got to be kidding! Listen! There's no time for this! In about 2 minutes that roof's gonna come down and all those people are going to die!" She saw the bouncer and the manager exchange looks. The manager pressed a button on his walkie-talkie. "Ronnie, call someone from the squad up here. Suspected drug use." He clicked off the radio with a look of satisfaction and tucked it into his belt loop. Jess looked at him in horror. "That's bullshit!" "Sorry, Miss Golden. You know the policy." "I'm not on drugs, you little—" "Oh, God! You've got to get those people out of here before—" There was a crash from the dance floor, and Jess cried out in alarm, frantically trying to pull away from the bouncer. "It started! You have to open up the exits. They're all locked and we can't get out. We're all going to—" She trailed off. The manager was holding aside the curtain to reveal a view of the room, where a waitress had just dropped a tray of glasses. Jess fell silent. She looked up at the manager sheepishly. "Good night, Miss Golden," he said. Under the floor, the fiberglass around the severed wiring ignited with a whoomph. Small flames spread along the length of the cabling, melting the plastic coating. The bare copper wire sparked and jumped against the floorboards, tiny blue flames licking hungrily along its length. Then a flame transferred itself to the fiberglass around it, and within seconds the entire roll was ablaze. Above it, the ancient rotten floorboards began heating up, the dusty underside charring in the heat. One end caught fire, and soon flames were racing up and down the boards. feeding on the air coming up through the minute cracks in the ceiling below. The thick plaster of the ceiling began to dry out as the heat intensified, enlarging the cracks further. Many years ago, when the warehouse's basement had been an actual basement rather than a club, there had been a wall dividing the room in two. That wall had taken some of the weight of the rooms above it, supporting the floor above and helping to spread the load. But now that wall was gone, knocked out to enlarge the dance floor. It was safe to do so, the club owner had been informed by a pal of his, because the warehouse above was no longer used. The rooms were completely empty, and so it was safe. And that would have been true if the floor above had been solid. But it wasn't. In fact, it was far from solid. It was a fire trap of moldering wood and flammable insulation, covered in a thin concrete shell. And right now, it was on fire. With a low groan, one of the internal wooden struts gave way. A tremor ran along the roof as the weight of the rooms above redistributed itself onto the other 5 beams that ran crosswise across the ceiling. They were on fire too. Slowly, the ceiling began to bow inwards. Jess struggled furiously as the bouncer hauled her bodily out of the room. She knew that it was pointless, but she had to do it anyway, if only for the look of the thing. Jamie and Tony trailed after her, but at a respectful distance to indicate that she wasn't really with them, and that they were going that way anyway. Catching her eye, Jamie gave her a little sad wave. Marching her down the creaky backstage steps, the bouncer tried the back door, but it was locked. Jess groaned in disbelief as he started taking her the long way round, through the crowd to the main exit. The young club-goers stared at her with interest as she passed by, some of them raising their drinks to her. "Get out of here now! The roof's gonna fall in!" she yelled at them. There was a wave of laughter, and the club bouncer gave her arm a warning shake that indicated that, should he choose to do so, her entire arm could quite easily be removed to stop the flapping of her mouth. Jess glared back defiantly, kicking and struggling, all the time giving the ceiling sharp glances. It stayed resolutely intact. But a clock was counting down in her mind. She knew that she was right. She just knew it. "Hey, that was a great little performance you gave up there, and I don't just mean the music." Jess shut her eyes as 2 jocks materialized in front of her, expressions of mock seriousness on their faces. They were holding open beer cans, and their faces were flushed with drink. One of them was short and dark and wore a tartan kilt. The other was taller and blond and would have been passably good-looking if it wasn't for the expression of smug arrogance in his face. They both leered at her. Jess gave them a look, still trying to pull away from the bouncer. "Drop dead, freak show!" The jocks beamed back at her widely. "Seriously?" said Kilt Boy. He looked her up and down, then waggled his eyebrows suggestively. "Me and Eric both thought you were great. Best thing we've seen in weeks. The scream you did, amazing. You should go into opera." Jess dug her heels in and swung round to face them, her eyes bright with anger. They stepped back, laughing. Jess glared at the taller of the two, the sandy-haired boy in a red and yellow Letterman jacket, and a spark of recognition flared in her mind. She remembered him now, in her vision. He had been the one who had tried to escape through the window. Tried to being the operative phrase. "What is wrong with you people? You have any sense of self-preservation at all? Then get out of here right now!" "Or what?" the jock sniggered. "Or this place is going to collapse and kill everyone, idiot!" spat Jess. The bouncer started trying to drag her away, but Jess stood firm. She stabbed a finger at the sandy-haired boy. "You want to know how you die?" "And what? Like, you're gonna tell me?" The jock laughed, sharing a what-the-fuck look with his friend. "No." Jess tried to fold her arms, remembered that one of them was being gripped by the bouncer, and gave up. Rationality was pointless in dealing with these two. She may well as try to argue with a pair of monkeys at the zoo. "No, I won't. In fact, I'm going to let you find out for yourself." "And then when will that be, gorgeous?" Kiltboy was having a great time. He sniggered. Jess made a big show of checking her watch. "Not soon enough," she spat. She tapped the bouncer's meaty arm as though urging on a horse and carriage. "Fuck this! Come on, Jeeves, let's pick up the pace. I have a gala meeting at 3. Giving her an odd look, the bouncer pushed past the jocks and stomped towards the main door. The jocks tailed Jess like hounds, sniggering to one another. They knew quality entertainment when they saw it, and they weren't about to let her get away without making things far, far worse. Jess groaned inwardly. At least they were going in the right direction. The sooner she got out of this place, the better. Then she could think more clearly, figure out exactly what she should do. As they passed the bar, a shout of "Hey!" came from behind the counter. Jess looked over to see a young black-haired waitress throw down her order pad and start running over towards them. She was dressed in a curious mix of official uniform and punk clothing, with bits of paper, presumably drink orders, speared on her spiky wristbands. The overall effect put Jess in mind of a teacher visiting the Rocky Horror Show. She watched her approach in alarm. The waitress homed in on the two jocks like a guided missile. The milling crowd blocked her way, but she barged her way through, upsetting drinks and treading on feet. She shook a finger threateningly at the jocks. "Oh, no, you don't!" "Shit, it's Macy, run!" As one, the jocks downed the remainder of their beers in one gulp and began running towards the door, giggling like idiots. Macy, the waitress, tottered after them as fast as her high heels would allow, all the while pouring forth a steam of vitriol. "I told them that letting you little horrors put stuff on tab was a bad idea, but did they listen? No, they didn't. All I hear from them is blah blah blah, daily targets, customer service, client knows best, and it's all a load of garbage. And then you little shits come in here with your fake IDs, trashing the place, and then expecting everyone to bend over backwards for you?" She tripped over a hidden step in the darkness and nearly fell, but regained her feet with an energetic flail of arms and continued. "Well, this waitress has had enough. Eric Prescott, I know that credit card that you used expired 3 months ago. It's not coming out of my wages this time. Come back here, you creeps!" They reached the outside door before Macy did, and the bouncer manhandled Jess out into the cool night air. Outside, the city streets were quiet. Somewhere a siren was wailing. The bouncer finally let go of Jess's arm. She rubbed her bicep, feeling a bruise start to form. "Did you have to train to do that?" she asked icily. The bouncer did not reply. The jocks burst through the door behind her and ran out into the night, howling with laughter. They gave one another a high five and danced off down the street chanting, "Free drinks! Free drinks!" Moments later, the door swung open again to reveal Jamie, followed by the irate waitress. Officer Hulet brought up the rear, anticipating trouble. Her big, important drug bust had turned out to be nothing more than a sack of instant lemonade packets and a few ounces of cannabis, and the cannabis had been taken off a member of staff. She was feeling somewhat foolish, and hoped that helping out here would allay some of her guilt about breaking and entering. It had not been a good day for her. "Come back here, you little bastards!" Macy set off in hot pursuit of the two jocks, who fled with loud whoops. Ignoring the plight of the jocks, Jamie crossed the sidewalk and trotted over to Jess. "Oh, there she is," he said. He stopped in front of her, his arms folded against the chill night air. "Well, the show went marginally better than last time," he said, trying to be cheerful. Jess dropped her eyes to the ground, a sense of foolishness creeping over her. "Where's Tony?" she asked quietly. "He went to the restroom," said Jamie. "I think the excitement got to him." He gave a small smile, then reached out and tucked an errant curl behind Jess's ear. "Hey, come on, girl. Look on the bright side. At least you didn't break anything this—" At that moment, the club collapsed. Okay, Slashaholics, this has been Chapter 2 of Final Destination Dead Reckoning, a novel by Natasha Rhodes. Gotta say, the way the first chapter had the premonition and everything, I was expecting just a little bit more from when it all really started to fall apart and go to hell. That being said, I still enjoyed the chapter. I still enjoy the characters, and just in Final Destination style, not everyone from the premonition gets saved. That happens a lot in the movies. Cassie and Tony are apparently still in the building, but we also get some randos that we didn't expect to survive the real event, and that's the waitress, the Scottish jock, and his buddy. So that's going to be and the cop, the cop did all of this, and I wonder if the story's going to get back around to that and discuss how she made this happen. Well, she made it happen, and also some bad construction tips from the owner of the building. And so I'm curious if it's ever going to come to the light that this cop did it by shooting that bullet to blow that lock out. But guys, what did you think of tonight's chapter? The way it all played out? Because honestly, I was expecting a little more from it than just, they got outside and the building collapsed. I thought we'd see some more telltale signs, some people, seeing that she wasn't as crazy as they thought she was. And maybe some of the ceiling falling before they got out of the building and they had to rush out quickly. But it's okay. After the first chapter, I don't think that, the book would have good flow if it was just bam, 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 just like the first chapter. So actually, in a way, I think this was a nice way for the event to actually occur. So, as I'm sitting here doing my commentary, I'm torn here. Part of me was like, oh, it could have been a lot more badass like the first chapter was, but the other part of me is like, no, that would have been overkill. So I think I'm happy with this chapter. I don't think I have a complaint anymore about that. But I am curious to see the character development going forward with Jamie and Jess now that he knows she's not crazy and just throwing a fit. I'm actually interested in their history together because obviously with the dialogue and the pushing her hair back and everything, there's some history there. So I'm actually invested. I want to see what's going on there and if they can reignite anything between the two of them, if that's the kind of history they have. I'm also curious about the cop's guilt in all of this and how it's going to weigh on her. We don't know a lot about her character, but would she even care? Would this kind of thing keep her up at night if she knew she was the one that caused this? Or is she just worried about her job and getting ahead at her job? The jocks, on the other hand, I can see them kind of being like that character from the first movie played by, the guy that played Stifler, they don't want to die, but at the same time, they're just not bright enough to understand what's going on whenever it's explained to them. Anyways, guys, the main point here is that I'm really looking forward to the rest of this book. The first chapter and now the second chapter have really done a good job of getting the hook set in my jaw, and now all it's got to do is reel me in, because I am ready to find out what happens next. And I hope you guys are as well. And I'll see you very soon with the next chapter or so of Final Destination Dead Reckoning. As I said at the beginning of the upload, this upload and all content on the channel is brought to you by the patrons on the Patreon page. That's Cecilia Spears, Hawaii, Sean Campbell, Catherine McClear, Carl Eakins, Iron Alexa, Allison Seib, and Ryan Woodward. Thank you guys so much for supporting the channel. Alright guys, until next time, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying, thanks for listening, and
I'll see you.